In the glittering canyons of Manhattan, where love seems as manufactured as the skyline itself, destiny is about to prove that true connection knows no tax bracket. When Elizabeth Morgan steps out of her $32 billion empire and into the city's shadows, she isn't just testing the waters of authenticity, she's secretly searching for a love that money can't buy. But fate has a way of mocking the best-laid plans. Marcus Johnson isn't looking for love. Once Detroit's most gifted master mechanic, now living on the streets, he's learned that life's greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars. When he offers to fix her stranded Mercedes for free, neither realizes they're about to embark on a journey that will challenge everything they believe about love, worth, and the walls we build between hearts. What follows is a story of how two souls from vastly different worlds would discover that sometimes the richest love stories begin when we have nothing left to lose but our hearts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late autumn wind cut through Marcus's worn jacket as he bent over the Mercedes engine, his hands moving with practiced precision despite the cold. The familiar scent of motor oil transported him back to better days, when his name had meant something in Detroit's automotive world. His fingers traced the smooth curves of the German engineering, muscle memory taking over as he diagnosed the problem. In his back pocket, edges worn soft with age, sat his master mechanic's certification from the Detroit Institute of Automotive Excellence, class of '98, top of his class. Sometimes on nights when the concrete beneath the overpass felt particularly hard, he'd take it out just to remind himself that he hadn't always been invisible to the world. "Timing belts loose," he muttered, more to himself than to the woman standing a few feet away, bundled in what he recognized as carefully cultivated casual wear. Too casual, really, for someone driving this particular model. But he'd learned, long ago, not to ask questions that weren't his to ask. 15 years ago, he would have fixed this in his sleep at Johnson & Sons Auto, the shop his father had built from nothing and passed down to him. The shop where he'd trained his own son. Tommy before... Marcus pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the task at hand. The past had a way of sneaking up on you when your hands were busy with familiar work. "It'll take about an hour," he said, straightening up and wiping his hands on a surprisingly clean rag he kept in his pocket. Old habits died hard. His father had always insisted on clean hands, clean tools, clean work. "I can do it right here if you're willing to trust me." The woman, Elizabeth she'd said her name was, studied him with an intensity that seemed at odds with her carefully. Constructed casual demeanor. "Why would you help me for free?" she asked, her voice carrying genuine curiosity beneath its practiced neutrality. Marcus smiled, the expression creating a map of weathered lines across his face. "Ma'am, when you've lost everything that defines you, sometimes the only thing left is what you can give away." He reached into his worn backpack, pulling out a set of tools that had survived every pawn shop temptation over the years. Each one represented a meal skipped, a night spent hungry, but they were his lifeline to who he'd been, who he still was, underneath it all. The memory of that day 5 years ago surfaced unbidden. The screeching tires, the sickening crunch of metal, Tommy's voice cut off mid-laugh. The insurance company's cold letter explaining why they wouldn't cover the lawsuit. The banks even. A colder foreclosure notice. His wife Claire's goodbye note, unable to live with the ghost of their son and the ruins of their life. But even as the memories threatened to overwhelm him, Marcus's hands remained steady on the tools. There was peace in the work, in knowing that some things couldn't be taken away. Not your skills, not your integrity, not your choice to help someone else even when you had nothing. "This model," he said, his voice growing stronger as he settled into the familiar rhythm of the work. "They often have issues with the timing belt around 60,000 miles. Most people don't catch it until it's too late." His hands moved with surgical precision, muscle memory undiminished by years of hardship. but catch it in time. Give it the care it needs, and this engine will run forever." Elizabeth moved closer. Her expensive perfume, a stark contrast to the motor oil and city grime. "You sound like you know these cars well." Marcus nodded, focusing on a particularly stubborn bolt. "Used to be certified for luxury European imports. Had a specialty shop for them after I took over from my father." He paused, surprised at himself for sharing even that much. Something about her seemed to draw the words out, despite his usual caution. That was another life. Elizabeth Morgan watched Marcus work, her keen eyes missing nothing. The Financial Times article burning a hole in her Chanel bag called her the Ice Queen of Silicon Valley. $32 billion in personal wealth, an empire built on algorithms that predicted human behavior, and a reputation for being brilliantly ruthless. If they could see her now, standing on a grimy street corner, deliberately slumming it in carefully selected, casual clothes from Target. She touched her watch, a $15 digital timepiece that felt alien against her skin after years of wearing. Pieces worth more than most homes. The fake crack she'd carefully engineered in its face caught the morning light. Everything about her current appearance was orchestrated down to the last detail. Everything except the tremor in her hands when Marcus had first approached to help. "Your board would have a collective aneurysm," her sister Jane had said when Elizabeth had first outlined this plan. The richest woman in tech playing princess and the pauper on the streets of Manhattan? Have you lost your mind? Maybe she had. But after watching her latest acquisition target, a promising startup with heart, turn into yet another soulless corporate machine under her leadership, something had snapped. The founder's words at the final board meeting had cut deeper than she'd admitted. "You don't build things anymore, Ms. Morgan. You just buy them and squeeze out their soul." Her phone buzzed. Her real one, not the burner phone she was carrying. Another message from the board about the upcoming merger. Elizabeth ignored it, focusing instead on Marcus's hands as they worked the engine with practiced care. There was something compelling about the way he handled each component, a respect for the machinery that spoke of deeper understanding. The morning's New York Times lay folded in her bag, its headline about Morgan Technology's latest acquisition feeling like it was written about someone else. "Morgan's Midas touch continues," it proclaimed, alongside a photo of her from 6 months ago. Power suit, perfect hair, Arctic smile. The woman who could turn any company into gold, who could calculate the worth of anything down to the decimal point. But what was the true worth of the gentle way Marcus explained each repair to her, assuming she knew nothing about cars? What was the market value of genuine kindness with no expectation of return? Her algorithms could predict consumer behavior with 99.9% accuracy, but they couldn't quantify the integrity she saw in this man who had every reason to be bitter, yet chose to help. "The belt's not the only issue," Marcus was saying, his voice pulling her from her thoughts. "There's wear on the crankshaft that could cause problems down the line. I can't fix that here, but—" He hesitated, then pulled out a worn business card for a local garage. "These folks are honest. They'll treat you fair." Elizabeth took the card, noting how he included others in his circle of care despite having so little himself. She'd researched him thoroughly before arranging this chance encounter. Marcus Johnson, former owner of Johnson & Sons luxury auto service in Detroit. A tragic accident, a lawsuit that stripped him of everything, a downward spiral that should have left him bitter and hard. Instead, here he was, helping a stranger with no expectation of reward. Her algorithms would have predicted a 93.7% chance of him asking for money, a 89.2% chance of him trying to exploit what was obviously a wealthy Mark. The numbers hadn't accounted for genuine human goodness. "Thank you," she said, and meant it, in ways he couldn't understand. Not everyone would help a stranger like this. He smiled, and for a moment she saw past the worn clothes and weathered face to the man he must have been before life had turned against him. Sometimes, he said, returning to the engine. Helping others is how we help ourselves. Elizabeth felt something shift inside her chest, something her wealth couldn't measure, her algorithms couldn't predict, and her empire couldn't buy. For the first time since she'd begun this experiment in human nature, she felt a flicker of guilt about her deception. Because despite all her careful planning, she hadn't expected to find exactly what she was looking for in the first person she tested. The old toolbox creaked as Marcus opened it, the sound as familiar as breathing. Inside, past the basic wrenches and screwdrivers, lay a folded piece of paper he hadn't looked at in years. The corner peeked out, a splash of crayon color against the worn metal. His daughter Sarah's drawing of their family, standing in front of the shop. He'd kept it through everything, through the pawn shops and the shelter nights, through rain and snow and despair. Might need to get deeper into the engine, he said, carefully closing the toolbox before the memories could overwhelm him. These symptoms, they're not adding up quite right. Elizabeth shifted her weight, appearing genuinely concerned. Is it serious? Could be. He wiped his hands, studying the engine with the focus that had once made him Detroit's go-to expert. For impossible cases, the timing belt's definitely loose, but there's something else. The way it's running. He cocked his head, listening to the subtle changes in the engine's rhythm. It's almost like it was deliberately mistuned. The flutter of discomfort across Elizabeth's face was so quick he almost missed it. Almost. I know what you're thinking, he said, reaching for a different wrench. Why trust some homeless guy with an expensive car like this? I get it. But you know what I've learned living on these streets? His hands moved steadily, confidently as he spoke. Money's a lot like an engine. People think it's all about having the right parts, the expensive components, but it's really about balance, about everything working together in harmony. Elizabeth moved closer, her designer boots carefully avoiding the puddles of oil. That's an interesting perspective. Take this engine, Marcus continued, his fingers finding the hidden problem with practiced ease. Someone's been in here before, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. They made it look like one problem when it's really another. He glanced up at her, noting the way she held herself. Too still, too controlled, kind of like wearing expensive perfume with Target clothes. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. I'm not going to ask, he said finally, returning to his work. Everyone's got their reasons. But I will say this, whatever game you're playing, be careful. Truth has a way of coming out, like oil from a cracked gasket. You can clean it up, but it leaves stains. He pulled out a small notebook from his pocket, its pages cramped with neat diagrams and calculations. I used to keep records of every car I worked on. Habit, I guess. Even now, he sketched the engine layout, marking the points of concern. See these connections? Everything affects everything else. You can't just fix one part and ignore the rest. Elizabeth leaned in, her carefully maintained facade cracking just slightly. You really do know your stuff, don't you? 25. Years of experience doesn't disappear just because everything else did. He straightened up, decision made. I'll fix it properly, all of it. No charge. But why? You could easily charge hundreds for this kind of work. Marcus smiled, touching the pocket where his daughter's drawing lay hidden. Because some things are worth more than money, like karma maybe, or just doing what's right because it's right. He reached back into his toolbox, past the newer tools to the ones that had been his father's. My dad used to say, son, the only true wealth is what you give away. Took me losing everything to understand what he meant. The sun was climbing higher, casting long shadows across the street. A few curious onlookers had gathered, probably wondering what a woman like Elizabeth was doing in this part of town, talking to someone like him. But Marcus had stopped caring about appearances long ago. There was honest work to be done, and his hands knew exactly what to do. Besides, he added, his voice softening, sometimes helping others is the best way to help yourself, even if you don't know you need helping yet. Elizabeth's sharp intake of breath told him his words had hit, and closer to home than she'd expected. Good. Maybe there was hope for both of them yet. The street vendor's coffee came in generic white cups, steam rising into the crisp morning air. Elizabeth watched as Marcus took a careful sip, his eyes closing briefly in appreciation. She'd insisted on buying them coffee, the least she could. "Do," she'd said, though the vendor's ancient coffee machine seemed a world away from her usual artisanal brew. The thermal efficiency ratio in these older Mercedes models, Marcus was saying, his voice animated for the first time. "It's actually quite remarkable. They implemented a dual-flow cooling system that most people don't fully appreciate." Elizabeth found herself leaning forward, genuinely intrigued. "You sound more like an engineer than a mechanic." "Engineering degree from Michigan State, actually. Class of '93. He smiled faintly. "Back then I thought I'd design cars, not just fix them. Life had other plans." She noticed how he cradled the coffee cup, savoring its warmth. "What changed?" "Family business called. Dad needed help. And there's something about working with your hands that textbooks can't teach you." His fingers traced the rim of the cup. "Did my thesis on predictive maintenance algorithms, if you can believe it, trying to teach computers to diagnose engine problems before they happened." Elizabeth nearly choked on her coffee. Predictive algorithms? That's interesting. Her own company's latest acquisition was a startup working on exactly that technology, though focused on consumer behavior rather than engines. "It's probably primitive compared to what they're doing now," Marcus said, misreading her reaction. "But the principles are the same. Patterns, relationships, everything connected." He gestured to her car. "Take your engine. The way it was manipulated, someone understood those relationships well enough to create a very specific problem." The knowing look in his eyes made Elizabeth shift uncomfortably. "What do you mean? The timing belt? The crankshaft wear? It's too precise to be accidental. Someone wanted this car to break down, but in a way that wouldn't cause permanent damage." He paused, watching her face. "Someone who knows engines almost as well as I do." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. "You know," he continued, his voice gentler now, "my father used to say there are two types of people in the world. Those who break things to see how they work, and those who learn how things work to fix what's broken." He took another sip of coffee. "I've always wondered which type I am. And what did you decide?" "Still figuring it out, aren't we all?" He pulled a napkin from his pocket and began sketching with quick, precise strokes. "Look at this. The way your engine systems interact. It's like a dance, each part responding to the others, creating something greater than the sum of its parts." Elizabeth watched his hands move across the napkin, creating complex diagrams from memory. This was no ordinary mechanic. The elegant simplicity of his explanations, the depth of his understanding, it reminded her of the best engineers in her company. "You never lost it, did you?" she asked softly. "All that knowledge, even after—" "Some things stay with you," he replied, adding final touches to his diagram, "like muscle memory or integrity." His eyes met hers, "or the ability to recognize when someone's testing you." Elizabeth felt her carefully constructed facade crack slightly. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." His voice remained kind, but his eyes were sharp. "The question is, what are you looking for, and why go to such lengths to find it?" Before she could respond, a group of teenagers passed by, their laughter echoing off the buildings. When they were gone, the moment had passed, but something had shifted between them, a truth acknowledged if not spoken. "Thank you for the coffee," Marcus said finally, folding the napkin with its complex diagrams and offering it to her. "Consider this a manual for what we fix today, though I suspect you'll understand it better than most." Elizabeth took the napkin, their fingers brushing briefly. In that moment she realized that her elaborate plan had backfired spectacularly. She'd come looking for authenticity and found it, along with something else she hadn't expected and wasn't sure she was ready for. The burner phone felt heavy in Elizabeth's hand as she scrolled through her research on Marcus. She sat in her parked car around the corner, watching him through the side mirror as he helped an elderly woman with her ancient Toyota. The woman's gratitude was evident in her smile, in the way she patted Marcus's cheek like a proud mother. Another delay in the Zhang merger, read the message on her real phone, ignored alongside 50 others. The world of billion-dollar deals and corporate machinations felt increasingly distant, like a movie she'd watched rather than a life she lived. Marcus had moved on to helping a teenage boy jumpstart his car, explaining the process with the same patience he'd shown her. Elizabeth's fingers found the dossier her private investigators had compiled. Marcus Johnson, former owner of Johnson & Sons Auto Service. No criminal record. No history of substance abuse, just a tragic accident, a predatory lawsuit, and a system that had failed a good man. "You're getting too invested," she muttered to herself, echoing her sister's warning from their last conversation. This was supposed to be an experiment, a way to find genuine kindness in a world where everything had a price tag. Instead, she found herself drawn into Marcus's orbit, fascinated by the quiet dignity with which he carried his losses. A young woman approached Marcus now, clearly distressed. Elizabeth watched through her camera's zoom lens as he listened intently, then reached into his worn backpack. He handed the woman something. Bus fare, Elizabeth realized, probably some of the money he'd earned from other repair jobs. The scene triggered a memory. Her father's voice, harsh in the aftermath of her first hostile takeover. "Lizzie, you've got to understand, in business, kindness is weakness. The moment you start caring about people more than profits, you've already lost." She'd lived by those words, built an empire on them. The algorithms she'd developed could predict and manipulate human behavior with terrifying accuracy, turning every human interaction into a calculated transaction. And yet here was Marcus, defying every probability, every cynical assumption about human nature. Elizabeth picked up her burner phone again, opening the notes she'd made about him. Between the lines of objective observations and background checks lay something she hadn't planned for: admiration. Not just for his technical brilliance, which rivaled her best engineers, but for something far rarer: authentic goodness. A knock on her window nearly made her drop both phones. "You know," Marcus said when she rolled down the window, his expression gentle but knowing, "if you're going to surveil someone, you might want to park farther away. That's a pretty distinctive car, even with the manufactured problems." Elizabeth felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just making sure I'm what I appear to be." He leaned against the car, seemingly unbothered by her surveillance. "I get it. Trust's hard to come by these days. But here's the thing about watching people. Sometimes you end up seeing more than you bargained for." The weight of her deception pressed against her chest. "Marcus, I need to figure some things out." He straightened up, adjusting his worn jacket. "Take your time. Just remember, the truth's like that engine of yours. The longer you let problems go, the harder they are to fix." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Elizabeth, or whatever your real name is, that phone you're trying to hide. The burner, you might want to check its GPS settings. High-end phones like that tend to sync location data automatically." With that, he walked away, leaving Elizabeth staring at her phones, realizing that she wasn't the only one who'd been paying attention. She'd come looking for authenticity and found it, along with the uncomfortable realization that she might be the one failing her own test. The old family photo was creased and worn, its edges soft from years of handling. Marcus sat on a bench in the small park near where Elizabeth had parked, the setting sun casting long shadows across the grass. In the picture, he stood proudly, in front of Johnson & Sons, his father's arm around his shoulders, his own arm around his teenage son, Tommy. Sarah, just 7 then, perched on his shoulders, her smile missing 2 front teeth. "They look happy," Elizabeth said softly, settling beside him on the bench. She'd followed him to the park, drawn by something stronger than curiosity. "We were," Marcus's thumb traced the outline of the shop's sign in the photo. Dad built that. Business from nothing. Used to say a good mechanic was part doctor, part detective, and part magician. He smiled faintly. Tommy had all three. Natural talent, just like his grandfather. Elizabeth watched his face, seeing the weight of memory. In every line, what happened? Life happened. Death happened. His voice grew distant. Tommy was 17, junior year, already talking about college, engineering programs. He had his grandfather's hands and his mother's brains. Marcus fell silent, his fingers tightening on the photo. There was this car, he continued finally. A high-end import. Customer complained about the steering. Tommy and I were working late, trying to figure it out. He was under the car when the lift... Marcus's voice caught. The investigation said metal fatigue, said it was nobody's fault, but the customer's lawyer saw dollar signs. Elizabeth felt her throat tighten. Her own company had crushed smaller. Businesses in court countless times. It was just business, she'd always told herself. The lawsuit was just the beginning, Marcus went on. Insurance wouldn't cover it. Some technicality about maintenance schedules. The legal fees ate everything. We had. Then came the media coverage. Local boy dies in family shop. It was ratings gold. Every customer we had, everyone who trusted us for 30 years, they all disappeared overnight. He pulled another photo from his wallet. Claire, his wife, beautiful and smiling. She tried to stay, tried to fight through it with me, but losing Tommy, it broke something in her. In both of us. One morning, I woke up to a note. I can't live with the ghosts anymore, it said. She'd taken Sarah with her. Have you seen them since? Marcus shook his head. Claire remarried, moved to California. Sarah's in college now. I check her social media sometimes when I can get Wi-Fi at the library. She's studying engineering. Pride and pain mingled in his voice, just like her brother wanted to. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. The bank took the shop, he continued, his voice steadying. Dad's legacy. Everything we'd built, gone in 18 months. I tried other shops, but word had spread. Nobody wants to hire the mechanic whose son died on his watch. Elizabeth found herself reaching for his hand before she could stop herself. His fingers were rough, calloused, honest. But you know what's strange? Marcus looked at her, his eyes clear despite the pain in them. Losing everything. It taught me what really matters. When you have nothing left to lose, you learn what you can't lose. Skills, knowledge, the choice to help others. He carefully tucked the photos away. That's why I knew something was off about you from the start. People who have everything, who've never lost it all, they don't understand that kind of truth. But you're looking for it, aren't you? That's why you're here playing this game. Elizabeth felt exposed, seen in a way her wealth had always protected her from. I didn't mean to... To what? Find out that real people exist behind the numbers in your spreadsheets? His tone was gentle, without accusation. Life has a way of teaching us what we need to learn, even if we don't know we need to learn it. The sun had almost set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. In the growing darkness, the distance between their worlds seemed both vast and insignificant. The job application form sat on the polished mahogany desk at Elite Motors, Manhattan's most exclusive luxury car dealership. Elizabeth watched through the showroom's tinted windows as Marcus approached the building, his reflection ghosting against the gleaming Ferraris and Lamborghinis displayed inside. "You're sure about this?" Trevor Chen, the service manager, asked. He owed Elizabeth's company a favor after her last-minute investment had saved his family's dealership chain. "No offense, but he doesn't exactly fit our image. Just give him the technical test," Elizabeth said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had made her billions. "Nothing else matters." She watched Marcus enter, saw how he took in the luxury around him without being overwhelmed by it. His clothes were clean but worn, the best he could manage after she'd anonymously arranged for the shelter to receive a donation of new clothing and supplies. "Mr. Johnson?" Trevor approached, clipboard in hand. "We received your application. Impressive background, though there's a significant gap in your employment history." Marcus stood straight, dignity intact. "Yes, sir. I can explain that." "No need. We're more interested in your current capabilities. Would you mind taking a technical assessment?" Elizabeth held her breath. This was the moment, not just a test of skill, but of character. The assessment she'd helped design contained deliberate errors, ethical challenges hidden among the technical ones. For the next 2 hours, she watched through the two-way mirror of the observation room as Marcus worked through the test. His hands moved with certainty over the specialized diagnostic equipment, his explanations clear and confident. But it was his response to the planted ethical scenarios that held her. "Attention! There's something wrong here," he said finally, looking up from the luxury SUV they'd given him to diagnose. "The computer shows a critical safety fault, but you've got it marked as a minor issue in the service records. This car shouldn't be on the road." Trevor glanced at the clipboard. "The customer's a VIP. They've requested we minimize the repair costs. Then they can minimize them somewhere else." Marcus stepped back from the car. "I won't sign off on repairs that could get someone killed. I've already lived through that nightmare once." Elizabeth felt something tighten in her chest. Even after everything he'd lost, his integrity remained unshakable. "One more scenario," Trevor said, moving to a Bentley with deliberate engine issues. "The customer wants—" "No." Marcus's voice was firm but not angry. "I appreciate the opportunity, but I think we both know this isn't just a job interview." He looked directly at the two-way mirror, somehow finding Elizabeth's eyes through the glass. "When you're ready to be honest about what you're really looking for, you know where to find me." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and that Ferrari. In the showroom. The one you're asking $1.2 million for. Its timing chain is about to fail. Might want to check that before someone buys it." Elizabeth watched him walk out, head high, dignity intact. She'd thrown the best job opportunity in the city at him, and he'd walked away rather than compromise his principles. "Well," Trevor said, "that was unexpected. Should we call security to verify his claim about the Ferrari?" "No need." Elizabeth stood, gathering her coat. "Have your team check it first thing tomorrow, and Trevor, when they find the problem, and they will, I want you to remember something. The man you just dismissed as unworthy of your image just saved you from a lawsuit that would have bankrupted you." She stepped out into the gathering dusk, watching Marcus's figure disappear down the street. He'd seen through her test, recognized it for what it was, and still chosen truth over opportunity. In her world of calculated risks and strategic plays, such pure integrity was as rare as it was valuable. Her phone buzzed, another message from her board about the upcoming merger. But for the first time in her career, the zeros in the profit projections seemed to be missing something essential, something that couldn't be measured in spreadsheets or algorithms, something that a homeless man with unshakable principles had. Just demonstrated was worth more than all the luxury cars in Manhattan. The tabloid's headline screamed across Elizabeth's tablet, "Tech Titan's mysterious disappearance. Morgan spotted in city slums." Below it, a grainy photo showed her talking to Marcus, though his face was mercifully obscured by shadow. She closed the article with trembling fingers, but not before catching phrases like mental breakdown and bizarre behavior. "This is getting out of hand," Jane's voice crackled through her earpiece. "The board's asking questions, Elizabeth. Serious ones. The Zhang merger needs your signature, and you're playing Mother Teresa in the streets." Elizabeth watched Marcus from her car as he helped a group of homeless teens figure out what was wrong with their ancient van. They'd converted it into a mobile soup kitchen, she'd learned, serving the community that had taken them in. "Did you hear what I said?" Jane pressed. "The Times is sniffing around. They're talking about market instability, questioning your leadership. Everything we've built," Elizabeth interrupted softly, "is based on predicting human behavior, monetizing it, controlling it. But what if we've been wrong, Jane? What if there's something our algorithms can't quantify? She watched as Marcus finished with the van, refusing payment from the teens, but accepting a bowl of their soup instead. The way he sat with them, listening to their stories, treating them with a dignity the rest of the world denied them. It made all her corporate achievements feel hollow. "Listen to yourself," Jane hissed. "One homeless man's sob story and you're ready to throw away a $32 billion empire? The board's meeting tomorrow. They're talking about invoking the mental incapacity clause in your contract." Elizabeth's finger hovered over a different article on her tablet. Morgan. Technologies accused of predatory acquisition practices. The piece detailed how her company's algorithms had been used to identify and exploit vulnerable businesses, including a Detroit auto shop chain that had gone bankrupt 5 years ago. The same year, Marcus had lost everything. Her own company's predictive software had probably flagged his business as a potential casualty in their market expansion. Just another data point in their relentless drive for efficiency. "I'll handle the board," Elizabeth said finally. "And Jane, remember when we started? Before the IPO, before the billions? Remember how we wanted to change the world? We did. Change it." "No." Elizabeth watched Marcus share his soup with an elderly man who had joined the group. "We just made it more efficient at being cruel." She ended the call and stepped out of her car, drawn toward the small gathering despite the risk of being photographed again. The smell of vegetable soup filled the air, along with something rarer, genuine laughter, unfettered by corporate politics or social climbing. Marcus looked up as she approached, his eyes knowing but kind. "Saw you in the paper today," he said, offering her his bowl of soup. "Though they got your net worth wrong, it's 32 billion, not 30. Elizabeth felt her carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. "How long have you known?" "Since the beginning," he shrugged. Hard not to recognize the woman whose company's acquisition strategies put half of Detroit's independent auto shops out of business, including mine. The soup turned to ash in her mouth. "Marcus, it's okay," he said, and somehow she knew he meant it. "You can't change the past, but you're here now, trying to understand something your algorithms can't. Compute, that counts for something." A camera flash went off nearby, another paparazzo hunting for headlines. Elizabeth instinctively moved to hide her face, but Marcus's quiet voice stopped her. "Maybe it's time to stop hiding," he said. "Real change doesn't happen from behind tinted windows." The irony wasn't lost on her. Seeking authenticity through deception, only to find that her subject had known the truth all along, and still chose to help, to teach, to show her what her billions couldn't buy. The viral post started with a shaky smartphone video, a homeless man and a woman in simple clothes, sharing soup with teenagers around a battered van. Unremarkable, until someone recognized her face. Within hours, the billionaire in disguise was trending worldwide. "This can't be real," read one comment. Elizabeth Morgan, the ice queen of Silicon Valley, slumming it with homeless people. Plot twist, another viral tweet proclaimed. That homeless guy is Marcus Johnson, former owner of Detroit's top luxury auto shop. His story will break your heart. Thread 1-23. Elizabeth scrolled through the growing social media storm on her tablet, her hands shaking. The thread detailed Marcus's tragic past, his son's death, the predatory lawsuit, and then came the connection that made her blood run cold. Johnson & Sons Auto was one of 200-plus independent shops that went under after Morgan Technology's automotive service platform entered the Detroit market. The algorithm that killed his business? She designed it. Her phone lit up with a message from Jane. "CNN wants to interview you. Now." Marcus appeared at her car window, his expression concerned. "You should see this," he said, holding up a paper. The headline made her heart stop. "So, tech billionaires' secret mission testing humanity one good deed at a time. They found the pattern," he continued softly. "Other broken-down cars, other people you've tested. They're calling you a real-life prince and the pauper, But not everyone's amused. Elizabeth's tablet chimed with breaking news. Morgan Technologies. Stock had dropped 12% in the last hour. The board was calling an emergency meeting. I never meant... She started, but Marcus cut her off. Yes, you did. You meant to test people, to find something real in a world you'd helped make artificial. You just didn't expect to find it in someone your own company had helped destroy. A group of reporters had gathered at the end of the street, their cameras ready. On Elizabeth's tablet, an anonymous source was leaking details of her other tests. The staged car breakdowns, the carefully orchestrated encounters. Your algorithm, Marcus said quietly, the one that predicted which businesses would fail after your platform launched. It got one thing wrong about me. It predicted I'd become bitter, desperate, that I'd do anything for money if pushed hard enough. Elizabeth met his eyes. But you didn't. No, because some things are worth more than money, like integrity, truth. He paused meaningfully. Love. The word hung between them as more camera flashes went off in the distance. On social media, Marked by Morgan was now trending, with other victims of her company's expansion sharing their stories. They're saying I manipulated you, Elizabeth whispered, that this whole thing was some sick billionaire's game, wasn't it? At first. But then you discovered that real human connection can't be predicted by algorithms. His smile was gentle but knowing. That genuine kindness exists even in a world your software says should be purely transactional. Elizabeth's tablet buzzed again. The board had called for her resignation. Her carefully constructed empire was crumbling. Around her, all because she'd dared to look for something authentic in a world she'd helped make artificial. But sitting there, watching Marcus's calm acceptance of both their truths, she realized she'd found something worth more than her billions. She'd found proof that human goodness could survive any algorithm, any system designed to crush it. The reporters were getting closer, shouting questions. Soon, there would be no hiding from the story they'd created. The billionaire who tried to quantify kindness and the homeless man who taught her its true value. What do we do now? She asked, feeling strangely liberated as her manufactured world collapsed. Marcus looked at the approaching media storm, then back at her. We tell the truth, all of it, and then we start fixing what's broken, in both our worlds. The truth exploded across every major news network in high-definition clarity. Elizabeth's company ID card, with its sleek design and executive clearance stamp, filled screens worldwide as reporters dissected her elaborate scheme. In the harsh glare of media scrutiny, every detail of her social experiment was laid bare. You didn't just test me, did you? Marcus stood in her temporary sanctuary, a quiet coffee shop whose owner had taken pity on them and locked the doors against the press. His voice was steady, but his eyes held a new darkness. I was just one of many, a data point in your search for... What exactly? Elizabeth's hands trembled around her untouched coffee. I needed to know if genuine goodness still existed. If everything couldn't be reduced to algorithms and profit margins. And the others? The single mother with the flat tire, the elderly man with the broken-down truck? She flinched. The media had found them all. Dozens of staged breakdowns, each carefully orchestrated to test human kindness. They were part of the experiment, yes, an experiment. Marcus's laugh held no humor. That's what you called destroying my business too, wasn't it? Just data points and market efficiency. Through the coffee shop's windows, they could see the media circus growing. Satellite trucks lined the street, their antennae reaching skyward like accusing fingers. My board's voting right now, Elizabeth said softly. By midnight, I'll likely be former CEO of Morgan Technologies. She pulled out her real phone. No more burner phones, no more pretense. The stock's down 30% and falling. Everything you built was based on predicting and manipulating human behavior. Marcus finished. And now you're surprised that people are angry about being treated like lab rats. A notification pinged on the television above the counter. The vote was in. Elizabeth Morgan, tech pioneer and billionaire CEO, had been removed from her position, effective immediately. You know what the worst part is? Marcus turned away from the TV. I actually started to... He shook his head. It doesn't matter now. Started to what? Elizabeth stood, desperation cracking through her composed facade. To care, to feel something. Because I did too, Marcus. That's what terrified me. The experiment stopped being an experiment the moment you showed me what real integrity looks like. Real integrity. His voice rose slightly. You watched me pour my heart out about losing my son, my business, everything. Knowing your company. Helped make it happen. You stood there and listened, playing your role, while I... He stopped, composing himself, while I started to fall in love with a lie. The words hit her like physical blows. Outside, cameras pressed against the coffee shop windows, capturing their confrontation in silent frames. It wasn't all a lie, Elizabeth whispered. The woman who shared soup with homeless teens, who learned about true worth from a man who had nothing but his principles, that's who I want to be. Who you helped me become. And who are you now? Marcus asked quietly. With your empire crumbling and your games exposed? Elizabeth reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder. I'm someone trying to make things right. She placed it on the table between them. This is everything. The algorithm that targeted small businesses like yours, the acquisition strategies, the manipulation techniques. Everything we used to build my empire by destroying others' dreams. Marcus stared at the folder. Why show me this now? Because you're the only person I trust to help me fix it. She met his eyes steadily. Not for publicity, not for redemption, but because it's right. You taught me that. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and pain. Outside, the world waited to see what would emerge from their private reckoning. Another cynical headline or something unprecedented. Truth and reconciliation between the algorithm queen and the man her formulas had failed to break. The rejection letter from Elite Motors lay crumpled in Marcus's pocket as he walked through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan. Word had spread fast. The homeless mechanic who'd brought down Elizabeth Morgan wasn't welcome in the luxury car world anymore. Too much publicity, too much controversy, too much truth. 3 blocks away, in the sterile confines of Morgan Technologies headquarters, Elizabeth watched security pack up her office. 15 years of achievements reduced to a single cardboard box. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages from people either denouncing her or trying to buy her story. The board's offering a severance package, Jane said, standing in the doorway. Generous one, considering. All you have to do is sign an NDA and admit you had a mental breakdown. Elizabeth stared at the wall of awards that would soon belong to someone else. And if I don't, they'll bury you. Legal's already talking about criminal charges for corporate espionage, misuse of company resources. Jane sighed. Just sign the papers, Liz. Walk away rich and quiet. But Elizabeth wasn't listening. On the TV mounted in the corner, a news segment showed Marcus walking away from Elite Motors, head held high despite everything. The crawler beneath read, "Homeless hero rejects luxury job offer. Some prices too high to pay. He's still choosing integrity," Elizabeth murmured. Even now, he's choosing poverty, Jane corrected. Don't romanticize it. Your little experiment cost us billions in market value. Real people lost real money. Real people? Elizabeth turned to her sister. Like the real people our algorithms targeted? The families we destroyed in the name of market efficiency? She walked to her desk, picked up the photo of herself and Jane at the company's IPO. They looked so young, so certain they were changing the world for the better. Remember what Dad used to say about money? Oh God, not this again. Money doesn't change people, Elizabeth quoted. It just makes them more of what they already are. He was right. My billions didn't make me cold. They just gave me the power to act on that coldness efficiently. Outside her office, employees hurried past, avoiding eye contact with their fallen CEO. On her computer screen, a notification popped up. Her personal accounts had been frozen pending investigation. The job offer at Elite Motors, Elizabeth said suddenly. "You arranged it, didn't you?" Jane's silence was answer enough. "A final test. See if he could be bought, discredited." Elizabeth laughed bitterly. "But he saw through it, just like he saw through everything else." "I was trying to protect you." "No, you were trying to protect this." Elizabeth gestured at the office, the empire they'd built. "But for what? So we could keep using algorithms to predict and exploit human weakness? Keep pretending we're making the world better while we destroy people like Marcus?" She picked up her cardboard box, ignoring the severance papers Jane held out. "You know what the algorithm never predicted? That someone who'd lost everything could end up being richer than me in all the ways that matter." The elevator ride to the lobby felt like a descent into another world. Reporters waited outside, held back by security. Her driver had already been dismissed, her company car reassigned. In a matter of hours, she'd gone from commanding a tech empire to standing alone on the sidewalk in the rain. But for the first time in years, she felt something real stirring. In her chest, not the cold calculation of profit margins, but the warm certainty of finally choosing truth over power. She pulled out her phone, ignored the hundreds of messages, and typed a single text to Marcus. "You were right about everything, and I'm ready to fix what I broke." The rain soaked through her expensive suit as she waited, not knowing if he'd respond or even read her message. Around her, the empire she'd built continued its efficient, soulless operations, while somewhere in the city, a man who'd lost everything but his principles showed the world what true wealth looked like. Elizabeth's resignation letter wasn't sent to the board or posted on corporate letterhead. Instead, she chose Twitter, the platform her algorithms had once manipulated so effectively. Her hands trembled as she typed, "To everyone my company and I have hurt. I owe you the truth." A thread, 1-24. The world watched in real time as the former tech titan laid bare everything. The predatory algorithms, the targeted destruction of small businesses, the cold calculations that had ruined countless lives. With each tweet, she could feel her old life crumbling away, but something stronger was taking its place. Our software didn't just predict human behavior, it exploited it. We didn't just analyze markets, we manipulated them, and I convinced myself it was progress, until I met someone who showed me what real progress looks like. In a homeless shelter across town, Marcus watched the tweets appear on a borrowed phone, surrounded by the community that had become his family. The teens from the soup kitchen van gathered around, reading aloud as Elizabeth continued. "To Marcus Johnson and every other small business owner we destroyed, I can't undo the past, but I can expose the system that made it happen. Today, I'm releasing all our predictive algorithms and acquisition strategies to the Justice Department." Her phone exploded with calls from lawyers, board members, and investors. She ignored them all, continuing to type, "I spent 6 months testing human nature, looking for genuine kindness in a world I'd helped make cynical. I found it in the last place my algorithms would have predicted, among those who had nothing left but their humanity." The shelter erupted in cheers as she mentioned them by name. The soup kitchen teens, the elderly mechanics who shared their knowledge, the community that had taken in Marcus and shown her what real wealth looked like. At Morgan Technologies, Jane watched in horror as the company's stock plummeted further. She tried calling Elizabeth again, but her sister was focused on something more important than market value. "My final act as CEO isn't a resignation, it's a confession. The attached documents detail every business we targeted, every life we disrupted. Not for legal compliance, but because it's right." She attached the files, years of corporate secrets laid bare for the world to see. Then came the hardest part. "To Marcus, you showed me that true character isn't what we do when we have everything, but what remains when we've lost it all. I thought I was testing humanity. Instead, you tested me. And I failed. But you also showed me it's never too late to choose a different path. In the shelter, Marcus read those words several times, remembering his own moments of choice after losing everything. Around him, his community, the one that had taken him in when he had nothing, pressed closer, offering silent support. Elizabeth's final tweet came with a photo, her corporate ID card, cut in half. "Starting today, I'm rebuilding from scratch, not to regain what I lost, but to become someone worthy of the truth I found. To anyone my algorithms hurt, I'm listening, and I'm ready to make it right." Within hours, the thread had gone viral. The Morgan confession trended worldwide. Former employees began coming forward with their own stories. Small business owners targeted by her company found their voices. The carefully constructed walls between corporate power and human consequence came crashing down. At sunset, Elizabeth stood outside the shelter, soaked by rain again, holding a simple envelope. Inside wasn't a corporate merger proposal or a market analysis, but something far more valuable, a plan for redemption, written in collaboration with those she'd once seen only as data points. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door, ready to begin her real life's work, not predicting human nature but nurturing it, not calculating worth but creating it. The new toolbox arrived without warning, left outside Marcus's usual spot under the bridge. It came with a note from the soup kitchen teens. "For the man who taught us that fixing things is about more than just engines." Inside, each tool gleamed with possibility, a stark contrast to his weathered old set. Marcus sat on his makeshift bed, Elizabeth's confession thread open on the shelter's shared computer. He'd read it 17 times now, each time finding new layers to the woman he'd thought he understood. The timestamp on her final tweet matched the exact moment he'd seen her standing in the rain outside Elite Motors, watching him walk away from their staged job offer. "You're still defending her?" Tommy had said in his dream last night, his son, forever 17, standing in their old shop. "After everything her company did to us?" But it wasn't that simple anymore. Marcus picked up a wrench from the new toolbox, testing its weight. The truth was as complex as the engines he'd spent his life mastering, multiple parts working together, each one affecting the whole. "She's different now," said Mike, one of the shelter regulars, reading the confession thread over Marcus's shoulder. "Money like that, power like that, most people wouldn't give it up for anything." Marcus thought about the moment he'd first suspected who she really was. The way she'd listened to his explanation of engine dynamics with too much understanding, her questions just a little too precise. He should have been angry, should have walked away. Instead, he'd found himself hoping she'd learn something her algorithms couldn't teach her. "Did you know," Mike asked, "the whole time, that she was Elizabeth Morgan?" "Pretty early on." Marcus set down the wrench. "That she was capable of this kind of change. That took longer to see." On the screen, a just Morgan confession continued trending. Critics called it a publicity stunt. Cynics predicted she'd rebuild her empire in a year. But Marcus had seen something in her eyes that final day. The same look he'd had after losing everything. When you realize that starting over isn't just about survival, but redemption. His phone buzzed, another message from Elite Motors, offering to reconsider his application if he'd distance himself from the Morgan situation. The old Marcus might have been tempted, might have seen it as a way back to his former life. But the man who'd lost everything except his principles understood something now. Sometimes the hardest engines to fix are the human ones, and the most important repairs can't be measured in dollars and cents. He picked up his old toolbox, the one that held Sarah's drawing and all his memories. Inside, worn but still solid, his tools told the story of a life rebuilt from ruins. Maybe that's what Elizabeth needed now, not judgment for who she'd been, but guidance toward who she could become. "You know what my dad used to say about broken engines?" he said to Mike, closing the computer. He'd say, "Son, anything can be fixed if you're willing to get your hands dirty and do the work." Maybe that's true for people too. He looked at his phone, at Elizabeth's last message still waiting for a response. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythm of wealth and want, power and powerlessness. But somewhere in between, there was room for something else, something his father would have called grace and his son would have called justice. Marcus picked up his phone and began to type. The hardest part isn't losing everything. It's deciding who you want to be once it's gone. When you're ready to rebuild the right way, I'll help, not because I've forgiven you, but because that's who I choose to be. The business plan was sketched on the back of a napkin at the same coffee shop where they'd had their confrontation. But this time, Elizabeth sat across from Marcus not as a billionaire in disguise, but as someone starting over, her designer. Clothes replaced by simple jeans and a sweater that actually belonged to her. A mechanic training program for the homeless, Marcus read from the napkin, his expression thoughtful. Teaching not just repairs but life skills, business management. He looked up at her. You're serious about this? Dead serious. Elizabeth pulled out her laptop. Not the corporate one she'd surrendered, but a basic model bought with what remained of her personal savings. I've been running the numbers. Not algorithms this time, just honest math. She turned the screen toward him, showing a spreadsheet far simpler than the complex predictive models she'd once wielded. We start small. 1 garage, 10 students. Focus on European luxury cars. There's always demand for qualified mechanics in that sector, and the profit margins are better. And the funding? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer from the way she squared her shoulders. I'm selling everything. The penthouse, the art collection, the private island I never visited. She managed a small smile. Turns out when you're not trying to be the world's richest woman, you need a lot less. Marcus studied the napkin again, adding notes in his precise handwriting. We'll need certifications, equipment, instructors who understand both cars and people. We? Elizabeth's heart skipped. You need someone who knows engines and teaching. He paused. I need to make something good out of everything that happened. So, yeah, we. They spent hours refining the plan, their coffee growing cold as they mapped out a future neither had imagined possible weeks ago. Elizabeth's phone occasionally buzzed with messages from reporters or lawyers, but she ignored them, focused on something more important than headlines or legal battles. The garage on 12th Street, Marcus said suddenly. The one that's been empty since COVID. Good bones, high ceilings, enough space for classrooms and work bays. Elizabeth pulled up the property listing. The price was a fraction of what she'd once spent on corporate parties. It would take work to renovate. Good thing you know some homeless people who are pretty good with tools. Marcus smiled and, for the first time since their worlds had collided, it reached his eyes. They visited the garage that afternoon. Paint peeled from the walls, and pigeons had made nests in the rafters. But Marcus walked through the space like a man coming home, pointing out where each station could go, how the workflow would move, where the classrooms could be built. Here, he said, standing in what would become the main work area, this is where lives will change. Elizabeth watched him, seeing not the homeless man she'd tried to test, but the teacher he'd always been. I had it all wrong, you know. I thought I was looking for proof that genuine goodness existed, but what I really needed was someone to show me how to be good myself. Marcus ran his hand along a workbench, wiping away years of dust. My dad used to say every repair starts with admitting something's broken. You've done that part. Now comes the real work. They stayed until sunset, planning and dreaming in the empty garage that would become their shared redemption. As the light faded, Elizabeth added one final item to their business plan. Name, Second Chance Auto Academy. Perfect, Marcus said, softly, because that's what we're really fixing here, isn't it? Not just cars or careers, but people, lives, second chances. In her pocket, Elizabeth's phone buzzed again. Probably another reporter wanting to know why a former tech billionaire was buying a run-down garage in the city's poorest district. But she didn't need to answer. The truth was all around them, in the plans they'd drawn, and the future they could see taking shape in the gathering darkness. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday, addressed to Marcus Johnson and guest, in elegant silver script. Sarah's handwriting, just like her mother's. Marcus stared at it for a long time, sitting on his shelter bed before calling the number. He'd memorized but never used. "Dad." Sarah's voice was tentative, adult in a way that made his heart ache. "I wasn't sure you'd call. I wasn't sure you'd want me to." He touched the invitation, tracing her name. "Are you certain about this? The media attention. That's exactly why I'm sure." Her voice strengthened. "I've seen the news, Dad. About Ms. Morgan. About what you're building together. I want you there, both of you." The story had been everywhere. Tech titan and homeless hero, romance or redemption. The tabloids couldn't decide if they were star-crossed lovers or a calculated PR stunt. The truth, as usual, lay somewhere in between. Elizabeth found him still holding the invitation when she arrived at the shelter for their daily planning meeting. She'd traded power suits for jeans, but couldn't quite hide the grace that came from decades of privilege. The other shelter residents had stopped staring weeks ago, accepting her as just another person trying to rebuild a life. "Sarah's getting married," Marcus said simply, showing her the invitation. "That's wonderful." Elizabeth's smile faded as she saw his expression. "Isn't it? Claire will be there, her new husband, all their friends." He gestured at himself, at the shelter around them. "It's one thing to read about your homeless father in the news. It's another to have him show up at your wedding, with a disgraced billionaire as his date." Elizabeth sat beside him. "We don't have to go if it's too much." "That's just it." Marcus handed her the invitation. "I want to go. I want to see my daughter get married. I want—" He stopped, emotion thick in his throat. "You want to show her that losing everything doesn't mean staying lost," Elizabeth finished softly. The wedding was held in a small church in Connecticut, far from the media's prying eyes. Elizabeth wore a simple blue dress that cost less than the accessories she'd once carried. Marcus wore a suit they'd found at Goodwill, altered by one of the shelter's residents who'd once been a tailor. Cameras clicked as they arrived. A few determined paparazzi had found them, but Sarah had hired security to keep them at a distance. The whispers inside the church were harder to block out. "Is that really him? Did you see the news about them? I heard she gave up billions for—" Claire sat in the front row, perfectly coiffed and carefully not looking their way. But when Sarah emerged in her wedding dress, none of that mattered. Marcus watched his daughter walk down the aisle, radiant and grown and somehow still his little girl, and felt Elizabeth's hand slip into his. "She has your smile," Elizabeth whispered. The ceremony passed in a blur of tears and joy. At the reception, Sarah found them at their corner table, beautiful in white and glowing with happiness. "Daddy," she said, and suddenly she was 6 again, climbing onto his shoulders at the shop. "I'm so glad you came." She turned to Elizabeth. "Both of you, what you're doing with the training program, it matters. It really matters." Later, during the father-daughter dance, Sarah leaned close. "Mum's not happy you brought her." "I know, but I am." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Because when I saw you together, watching you both, I finally understood what you always taught me about integrity, about choosing to be more than what life makes you." As the song ended, Elizabeth appeared at their table, looking uncertain until Sarah hugged her too. "Take care of him," she whispered. "He deserves someone who sees his true worth." The media got their photos. The homeless hero dancing with his billionaire partner at his daughter's wedding, but they missed the real story. 2 people who had lost everything finding something priceless in each other's redemption. The foundation documents lay spread across what had once been a grease-stained workbench, now transformed into a makeshift office. Second Chance Foundation, rebuilding lives through skills and dignity. read the header, followed by page after page of carefully crafted bylaws, ensuring that what they built could never be corrupted by profit margins or corporate takeovers. "It's really happening," Elizabeth said, signing the last page with a simple ballpoint pen. No more Mont Blanc signatures on corporate takeover documents. She looked around at their renovated garage, barely recognizable after 3 months of work. Clean walls gleamed with fresh paint, donated tools hung in ordered rows, and 10 workstations waited for their first students. Marcus stood by the main bay doors, watching their first class arrive. 10 people, chosen from shelters across the city, each carrying stories of loss and hope that mirrored his own. "Remember when you first approached me with that deliberately broken Mercedes? Seems like a lifetime ago." Elizabeth smiled, joining him. "I was so sure I had everything figured out. And now? Now I know that fixing things, really fixing them, means getting your hands dirty and doing the work." She watched as their students gathered, some nervous, some eager, all carrying the weight of past failures and future possibilities. "Just like you taught me." The opening ceremony was simple. No champagne or corporate sponsors, just coffee and donuts from the neighborhood bakery that had hired 3 of their volunteers. Marcus stepped forward to address the group, his voice steady with purpose. "Welcome to Second Chance Auto Academy," he began. "Some of you might recognize me from the news, others might recognize me from the shelters. Both stories are true, and both are part of why we're here today." He gestured to the workstations. "These tools, these skills, they're not just about fixing cars. They're about fixing lives, about remembering that your worth isn't measured by what you've lost, but by what you choose to rebuild." Elizabeth stepped up beside him, no longer the tech titan, but a partner in something more meaningful than market share. "Every person here has a story," she added, "of loss, of struggle, of survival. Starting today, we're going to help you write the next chapter." The first lesson began with the basics: safety protocols, tool identification, workplace ethics. But as Marcus moved among their students, he saw something awakening in their eyes: pride, purpose, possibility. The same things he'd rediscovered when a supposedly broken-down Mercedes had led him to an unexpected second chance. During the lunch break, one of their students, a former accountant who'd lost everything to addiction, approached Elizabeth. "I saw what you did," he said quietly. "Giving up your company, exposing the corruption. It couldn't have been easy." "Neither is admitting you need help," she replied, "or accepting it when it comes in unexpected ways." She glanced at Marcus, who was showing another student the intricacies of a timing belt. "Sometimes the things we think break us actually put us back together stronger." By day's end, their first class had completed their initial training module: small victories, a properly identified tool set, a successfully diagnosed engine problem. But Marcus saw in their accomplishments the same spark that had kept him going through his darkest days. As the students filed out, each with a set of basic tools provided by the foundation, Elizabeth touched the wall where they'd hung their mission statement: "Everyone deserves a second chance to rebuild their life." "You know," Marcus said, locking up for the night, "when you first staged that breakdown, you said you were looking for genuine goodness in the world. And instead, I found something better," she finished, "the chance to create it." They stood in the doorway of their school, no longer a billionaire and a homeless man, but partners in something that transcended both their past lives. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythm of fortune and fate, but inside these walls, they'd built something algorithms couldn't quantify and money couldn't buy. A place where broken things and broken people could learn to run true again. 1 year later, a framed photograph hung in the entrance of Second Chance Auto Academy. It showed a Mercedes broken down on a Manhattan street corner, a homeless man bent over its engine, and a woman in carefully chosen casual clothes watching him work. Below it, a simple caption read, "The moment everything changed." Elizabeth stood before it now, touching the frame gently. The woman in the photo felt like a stranger, the calculating billionaire who thought she could quantify human goodness. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, sharing photos of her new baby, Marcus's first grandchild. "When are you and Dad coming to visit?" the text read, making Elizabeth smile at how naturally they'd all grown into their unexpected family. "Ready for the graduation?" Marcus appeared beside her, grey hair neatly trimmed, wearing clean coveralls with head instructor embroidered above the pocket. No longer homeless, but still the same man whose integrity had changed her world. 120 graduates. So far, Elizabeth said proudly. 87% employment rate. Numbers that actually mean something. The graduation ceremony filled their expanded facility. 3 garages now, with classrooms and a computer lab. Their graduates sat front and center, each story a testament to possibility. The former bank executive who'd lost everything to gambling, now running their business skills program. The veteran who'd lived under bridges for years, currently managing their second location. The teenage runaway who'd become their youngest certified mechanic. "When I first met Marcus," Elizabeth began her speech, "I thought I was testing human nature. I was a billionaire with an empire built on predicting and manipulating behavior. He was a homeless man who'd lost everything except his principles. I thought I would learn if genuine kindness still existed in our cynical world." She paused, looking out at faces that had become family. "Instead, I learned that kindness isn't something you measure. It's something you choose. Every day, every moment, regardless of what you have or what you've lost." Marcus took the podium next, his quiet dignity filling the room. "My father used to say that anything can be fixed if you're willing to do the work. This past year has proven him right in ways he never imagined. We're not just fixing cars here, we're fixing the parts of ourselves that the world broke." After the ceremony, they walked together through their transformed garage. Students and graduates mingled with potential employers, sharing stories and hopes. The soup kitchen teens who'd once fed them now ran a catering business trained through their entrepreneurship program. "Remember what you asked me that first day?" Marcus said, stopping by his old toolbox, now mounted in a display case. "Why I'd help you for free. You said, when you've lost everything that defines you, sometimes the only thing left is what you can give away," Elizabeth recalled. "I was right about that," he smiled, taking her hand. "But I was wrong about having lost everything. Sometimes what looks like an ending is just life giving you a chance to rebuild something better." Through the windows, they could see their next class arriving for orientation. More stories waiting to be rewritten, more lives ready to be rebuilt. The media had long since moved on to other stories, but the real story was here, in the quiet. Victories of each person who walked through their doors, looking for a second chance. The photograph watched over them all, a reminder that sometimes love arrives disguised as a broken-down car, and sometimes redemption wears coveralls and carries a wrench. In the end, they'd both found what they were looking for, just not in the ways they'd expected. Elizabeth squeezed Marcus's hand, feeling the strength of the man who'd taught her that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars. Together, they turned to welcome their new students, ready to help write more stories of second chances and lives rebuilt from the ground up. "So," she whispered, "was it worth giving up being a billionaire for?" Marcus smiled, the same smile that had first shown her what real richness looked like. "Some things," he said, "are worth more than money. You taught me that." Above them, the Academy's motto gleamed in fresh paint: "Everyone deserves a chance to rebuild." It wasn't just about cars anymore. It never had been. It was about the endless possibility of human hearts to repair what was broken, to rebuild what was lost, and to find love in the most unexpected places.